Molly Nelson in for Jackie, and Rekha is here as she is each and every Wednesday at this time.
Okay,
Good
the
to
most
see you.
important thing this morning, since you're here from the register.
Yes.
Do you know anything about the Rag Bri Round?
About the
Have you heard
rag.
anything about the
I'm
rag?
clueless about these things.
Not even one city it's going through?
Nothing. No, I don't even know the dates. I mean, I'm in a very separate department, I'm sorry to say. But I could try to do some
You're on the same
snooping
computer
around
network.
for you.
Yeah.
Like I could try to cozy up to the right people and
Yeah.
you know, take them out to lunch.
Well,
or
do it for me.
something.
I'd appreciate it.
I'll do that.
You have
I
3
will.
days. 3 days to figure it out. 'Cause
Yeah.
They're going to
3
announce
days?
it on Saturdays. We want to
Yeah.
try to get the scoop before
Okay.
anybody else does.
It's very important.
I'll think
right.
about that. How best to strategize on that
All right.
angle.
Something else that is important is what we're talking about today.
Which is Morocco. Now, I know that sounds kind of random, given the fact that we had Sarah Palin in town last night.
Yeah, that's what I thought it would be.
Endorsing, well, that'll come all in due course, endorsing Donald Trump. But no, actually, I did a fascinating interview by telephone on Monday with a gentleman who is Morocco. He heads up the Council for Human Rights in Morocco. And this man was in exile since the 1970s under a previous king of Morocco. Now, in Morocco, the king is the supreme commander of all the faithful. That means, you know, all the Muslims, all the Jews, all the Christians. The king is the one that they report to.
So this is the country across the Straits of Gibraltar.
Northern Africa,
right south
Morocco,
of Spain.
Algeria, Tunisia, yeah, they're
Yeah.
all, you know, in Northern Africa. And I guess the moral of it, I should backtrack a little bit. The point that I'm trying to make in this column as a result of this interview and other information I've had about the rights of women in various Muslim countries is that not all Muslim countries are the same when it comes either to human rights in general or to women's rights in particular. And in Morocco, as I learned from this gentleman, a woman can actually walk into a pharmacy and buy birth control pills without a prescription.
Which you cannot do in the United States of America.
Cannot do in the United States of America. They're actually ahead of us on some aspects of, you know, reproductive rights and freedoms. So how did that come about? I mean, Morocco is a Muslim country. It has a parliamentary system of government, and the majority is controlled right now by someone from the Islamist political party. So he's the prime minister, but he does not necessarily subscribe to the liberalization efforts that are going on in the country. Those are really the result of popular movements by women and by young people demanding greater human rights, civil liberties, and personal freedoms. So this man who was in exile living in France, his name is Driss El Yazami. He's the one who I interviewed. He was in Washington, D.C. for some meetings, and I just had an opportunity to connect with him. He was brought back by the present king, who is looking to do some liberalizing of the country's social laws, especially public policy laws affecting women. And so he came back, and he is pushing for liberalization in so many spheres. The country has had a very strict anti-abortion law that only allows for, in cases of, I think, rape or incest, allows abortion. And he's actually trying to liberalize it so that it would be allowed if there are potential fetal anomalies, or even, this example just blew my mind. He said, let's say, you know, there's a woman and she's had a long-term affair with a man, and then the relationship breaks up, but she's pregnant. You know, she should be allowed to get an abortion. And I said, whoa, that is such liberal thinking. That's such progressive thinking. And I know you're scratching your head and
just
saying,
awful.
But no, it's not awful. Why shouldn't a woman have the right to decide what happens to her own body?
Well, we're not going to get
based
into
on her
this
own
right now,
circumstances?
as we have many times before on this.
Yes, we could do it every week. But here's my point. We have these stereotypes about Muslims and Muslim countries and the rights of women that tend to be quite wrong in some circumstances, because things are happening. These countries are very dynamic, and their populations are very dynamic, and there's this thriving civil society which is engaging in conversation about what laws don't serve women and don't serve people's human rights in general, and then pushing to get them changed. And they're using this wonderful process where they will study an issue at, you know, the behest of the king, for example. And one of those issues that they've been looking at besides abortion is inheritance laws, which strictly favor men over women. So
in
I
many
think
countries.
Yeah, in many countries. In Morocco, I think men get double what women are allowed to inherit by law. And this, so what he does, he studies, he issues report, he does a lot of research, has his council do research on exactly what the laws are, who's impacted. And on this abortion thing, by the way, the research showed, although they don't have scientific data, that something like
800, you wrote.
800
back alley abortions
are taking place every
deaths.
day, resulting in
every day?
Every day, 800, right? Resulting in what they say are 13% of maternal deaths in the country. So, I mean, the research really does point to the need for some solutions. Whatever you decide they may be, that is not an acceptable thing to have that many women having back alley abortions and then dying as a result of them. So with the inheritance law, same thing. He did the research, then he sends out a very broad appeal. Oh, and first there's a council that gets together of clerics and of civil society people, of politicians, of leaders of all different aspects of life and with different political perspectives, and they get together and try to hammer out some thoughts, and then they ask for public input. So it's a very democratic, grassroots
Sounds
kind
like
of a
it, yeah.
process. It really is. It's wonderful. And then they get recommendations from the public, and then they make their recommendations to the parliament, which votes. So they did this about reforming the abortion laws last year, and now they're waiting to see what parliament comes up with, and probably there will be some laws promoted to liberalize some bills promoted in Parliament to liberalize the abortion laws, but we don't know yet what form they'll take. And, so I asked him, how do you deal with very hardline clerics who would argue, as I imagine the Prime Minister from the Islamist Party would, that it's in the Quran that women should not be allowed to inherit, or that women should not be allowed to have abortions, or homosexuality is, verboten, things like that. And he said it's really, in some of these instances, it's not much different than what the anti-abortion movement in this country argues, which is not necessarily always relying on specific texts in the Bible, but is more, that...
broad-based.
Exactly, broad-based. And he said, in a lot of these cases, there is no Islamic prohibition against these things in the Holy Book. It's just that clerics have decided to define it that way as a religious issue. So even on the inheritance thing, the Prime Minister accused him on national television of being anti-Islamic because he's proposing that women be allowed to inherit as much as men. And he says there's no foundation in Islam that would say that, women should not be equal to men in those ways. So what he's doing is promoting this flourishing conversation that I think, I'm seeing, frankly, and I know you're sitting over there foaming at the mouth, Jason. I'm seeing some very interesting parallels to what's happening. Actually, they're moving in reverse, I think. Over there, religion has for a long time dictated social laws and policies and practices. And over here, democracy has, the Constitution has. But now things are shifting, and now, the religious right is really trying to push hard for changes to laws on social policies and public policies. And over there, they passed a new constitution in Morocco in 2011, which defines human rights in a very liberal, democratic way. So there is this kind of tension going on now between the constitution and the hardline religious clerics. But they're sparking a public movement with public input on these things. And I just find it so fascinating, and I think in the end, we're not that different than they are. We have the same kinds of tensions.
What's the takeaway maybe for us in the United States? It's hard to, I care about Morocco, but I don't necessarily care that much about Morocco because I'm over here.
Right.
What's the takeaway maybe for us in the United States as we try to understand the Muslim religion and understand Muslims, because there is a little bit of angst towards that community, and I'm not saying it's a viable angst, but it's there.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good question, Molly, and I think the answer is to understand that the Muslim religion is not monolithic in terms of how it, in terms of the impact that it has on various governments in the Muslim world. Okay, so there are some that are really quite liberal in their orientation, that recognize human rights, women's rights, and where the constitutions are evolving to be these very progressive documents. So the tensions that are going on are more social. But to think of all, I often, anytime I say anything in defense of a Muslim, I will get, rabid letters from people here saying, they stone women to death in the Muslim world. Why are you standing up for Muslims? Muslims all are terrorists and radicals. And that is just not true. There are women in Muslim countries who have, as we say, some rights that women here don't, like to buy birth control without a prescription.
Yeah, this shines a whole new light on what's going on.
Exactly. And there are thriving conversations going on.
And this is in the paper today?
And this is in the paper today. And just, to wrap that up, that there is Indonesia, and there's Syria, and there's Saudi Arabia, where women don't have the right to drive, okay? But then there are all of these other countries in which they have broad liberal rights. So, don't lump all Muslim countries together as one.
There you go.
Well said.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rekha.